Hello, today we will be discussing Marbury v. Madison, one of the most important Supreme Court cases in United States history. By the end of this video, I hope that you are able to compare the power of the Supreme Court prior to Marbury v. Madison with the power of the Supreme Court after Marbury v. Madison, and be able to analyze the significance of the decision of Marbury v. Madison on the U.S. court system. We will be looking at several important questions today, including: what are the powers of the judicial branch according to the Constitution? And why was Marbury v. Madison a significant court case? So first we're going to go through a little review looking at a question we've already discussed in this class. What are the powers of the judicial branch according to the Constitution? As you may remember from earlier this year, the article in the Constitution discussing the powers of the judicial branch is quite short, only several paragraphs in length to be exact. Article 3, which is in fact the article that sets up the judicial branch, explains the structure for setting up the court system. This includes district court, circuit court, and the Supreme Court. Today we'll be spending most of our time talking specifically about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has the power to try cases involving multiple states and ambassadors. In addition, it is explicitly stated in the Constitution that judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of this United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority. Let's take a minute to try to process that. What does that mean? Does the Supreme Court have a right to rule on whether a law is being violated? What does this part about treaties mean? When it comes down to it, how much power does the Supreme Court actually have? The answer in this lies in the profession of law itself. Those who work in law deal with vague and nonspecific language all the time. So judges, in dealing with this, usually take one of two options. They either establish a new precedent based on their interpretation of the law, or look at past cases and examine how other judges ruled on similar cases in the past. Essentially, judges decide how laws actually apply in real life. In the time of Marbury v. Madison, which we are discussing today, you have to consider that the Chief Justice, John Marshall, had no previous cases to go off of. John Marshall etched a mark in the blank slate that was the Supreme Court. The question is, what mark did he leave behind? So now that we've briefly talked about some of the powers of the judicial branch, let's look at our second question. Why is Marbury v. Madison important to study? To understand this, we're going to go through a little background of the case. Marbury v. Madison was over an issue that has existed all throughout American history into today.
They took our job.
No, that clip wasn't just shoved in there for no reason. Marbury's original complaint was that somebody hadn't given him his job. As we've discussed in previous classes, the president has the power to make a number of appointments. As John Adams left office in an attempt to get as many Federalists, his political party, into power as possible, made a number of appointments before Thomas Jefferson, who had just beaten him in an election, could take office. One of these appointments was a rather minor office, Justice of Peace. This appointment was to William Marbury. However, after John Adams left office, Thomas Jefferson told his Secretary of State, James Madison, to refuse to allow Marbury to take his appointment, to which Marbury said,
They took our job.
Marbury then responded by appealing to the Supreme Court for a writ of mandamus. This would force Madison to give Marbury his job. The case was accepted by the Supreme Court. In front of Justice John Marshall were three key questions. Is Marbury entitled to his appointment? Is his lawsuit the correct way to get it? And is the Supreme Court the place for Marbury to get this issue fixed? The last question was of the greatest significance. What power did the Supreme Court really have? Although the Supreme Court was supposed to be the law of the land, no cases had emerged yet to determine this. What John Marshall decided in this case would change the Supreme Court and the country forever. In this case, Marshall established a principle that became known as judicial review. Judicial review is the power of the Supreme Court to declare a law unconstitutional. Although Marshall agreed that Marbury deserved the job, Marshall said that part of the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. Part of the Judiciary Act of 1789 allowed the courts to issue writs of mandamus. However, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the Supreme Court has this power. Ironically, by denying the Supreme Court this power, he gave them a much greater power, declaring laws unconstitutional. Many disagree with this decision, such as Thomas Jefferson, who believed in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. However, the decision was etched in stone and would guide the nation in future disagreements for many years to come. For as many constitutional issues that are solved by the Supreme Court, the decisions they made on laws throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st century often raised more questions than they did provide answers. John Marshall's decision on Marbury versus Madison turned judicial power into a reality, but the battle over how the Constitution would be interpreted would rage for many years to come. Regardless, allowing our judicial branch to become powerful balanced the country's three branches, and Marbury versus Madison will be forever remembered as a case that changed the entire structure of the government of the United States of America.